Welcome to the show. I'm hosting today Bradley Jacobs, our founder of Mylance, and I'm here today with Aaron Berger. Aaron, thanks so much for your time today.
Thank you for having me. Really appreciate it.
Absolutely. Let's just jump right in. Would love to have you give our audience a just super quick introduction of who you are and where you're at today.
Yeah, absolutely. So as you mentioned, name's Aaron Berger. I'm the founder of ASB Strategies. It's really a boutique communications agency. We started back in 2019 before the pandemic and have really worked across the spectrum of different types of companies, from VC backed all the way up to Fortune 500 companies. We help do some consulting for agencies, and really across the board, whatever's needed, from narrative to media relations to crisis communications. We are happy to work with a variety of different clients on.
Awesome. And you say we, it's just been you, right? I know it's a royal we, but
it's a royal we. Yes, it is just me. I should specify that. I can go into it, but do often work with freelancers, and then of course with certain partners that I've worked with as well. But ultimately, the organization, if you want to call it, is just me.
Awesome. And give us a sense of what, just any kind of numbers you're willing to share around what year one was like. And I know you're going to your fifth year now. So what does the trajectory look like for 4 years that you've been doing it?
So the growth has been strong. We have doubled every year. The first year when I started this, and I can kind of go into a little bit more of the journey, I was actually kind of freelancer and W-2 employee, as well as having my own business. So kind of had both types of revenue. That evolved, and now, of course, it's all just revenue that's coming into the business at this point. And over the last few years, again, it has doubled every single year. And, we're looking at the mid six figures at this point.
Mid six figures. So your first year from the consulting business specifically, what did that look like in year one?
Year one. So and just to clarify, are you talking revenue numbers, or are you just talking in general what that looked like?
Just to give the audience an idea of revenue numbers, if you're whatever you're willing to share, it can be general.
Yeah, I'd have to remember exactly, but the first year was in that $70,000 to $80,000 range, in all likelihood. And then each year we have doubled. Although I will say last year was the first year where we did not double, but over time, especially as a freelancer, those numbers are going to be harder and harder to continue to grow. And honestly, that's where I'm at right now, is figuring out how to find similar growth, because at a certain point, you just do not have the same kind of bandwidth that you did when you were starting out, and having to make some decisions about how do you keep growing as expenses start to pile up, as you get new requests, as demands start to grow. It becomes harder and harder. It's just, you only have so much time during the day, and there's only so many things that you can do. So to continue to grow, it eventually ends up kind of flattening a bit more. But yeah, the first 3 or 4 years, it was definitely rapid growth, and it was both confirmation of what I thought was going to happen, a little bit scary, but also definitely validation. And it was a nice sort of, okay, this is really going to work type of affirmation.
And let's talk about that fear for a second, because that is so common. Everyone has it. There's so many people that want to go out on their own that are scared, and they might not even be consciously scared, but they're scared in some fashion, and it holds them back. What was that like? And how did you actually tangibly get over that to actually do this?
It's a great question. And I think ultimately what it came down to was real conviction at the end of the day. I had a feeling for a long time that the communications industry was shifting, and that things were becoming more distributed. Things had consolidated, but with the internet and technology, the opportunity for small organizations or even individuals was out there in a way that it really wasn't in the past. At that point in my life, I was working at IBM, and I really kind of just looked at where I was and felt like, I've always kind of wanted to try this. I've always wanted to see what would happen if I took this leap. And ultimately I kind of just had to say, I'm going to see what's going to happen. And, I can always go back to a larger organization. That is always going to be out there. There's always going to be opportunities at businesses or agencies or other areas. But, if I look back 20 years from that moment in 2019 and I didn't at least try it, I'm going to regret not taking that chance. So, I also didn't have, I was just engaged. I didn't have any children. So kind of the opportunity to take some risks was definitely there. Now I have a toddler. Would I be as willing to just take a leap of faith? I'm not sure I would. But at the same time, I would say to anybody who is kind of curious or is that kind of inclination that maybe I want to try being a freelancer or try entrepreneurship, to give it a chance, because, there are other opportunities down there. And if you're at the point of your career where you've built a network and you have good people and you can trust yourself, then there's not a whole lot of downside, I think.
And let's call out something specifically that you did, maybe intentionally or maybe not, but you went through the worst case scenario in your head.
Yes.
Right?
I would say I did. I would say, look, worst case scenario is I leave, I have 6 months, let's say, and nothing happens. And then we're looking at the middle of the year. And, I have to go out and look for another job, but at least I say I tried it out. And, I saved some money up before taking that leap. I kind of had all of the things that I needed to in place. So I knew I would be okay for a certain amount of time. But was ready to, I was ready to fail, I guess you could say, if it wasn't a success. And fortunately, it has not been a failure. But that was definitely something I was ready for and was okay with before I took that leap.
One thing I did was I polished up my resume and I actually applied to jobs before I quit, just to see, just to really test out that worst case scenario. I saw my value in the market and I was like, okay, I could fail, just like you, just like you said. And if I do, I'm going to be okay.
Yeah. And I think to that point, being okay, and I know it's can be a cliche sometimes to say, you have to fail to succeed and all those other kind of things that people have talked about. But I think it wasn't really, I don't know if that was what it was, but it was definitely, there's nothing wrong with trying and knowing that you did have options, even if this path didn't work out, was definitely a big portion of it.
And as you said, if you look back 20 years and you have that regret of never having tried this, that's much more of a hard pill to swallow than I went out there, I tried it for 6 months, it didn't work out, and now I'm frankly back where I started, right? I'm nowhere, no worse, or in fact, I'm better because I tried something.
And we can go into this a little bit more, but one of the things I also find kind of interesting is even as the journey has continued, there are times when I think, maybe it would be nice to go back into an organization, or maybe we could do something, kind of be a part of some other company or some other agency or some other area. And that kind of push and pull doesn't really ever stop. And that was something that I've found very interesting in this journey, is that even as the business has been growing, there sometimes is still a pull and always a thought of, well, what would it be like to do something else or to go back into an organization? And that has been something that has been a surprise as I've gone through this journey over the past 5 years, is that sort of feeling of what does the other side look like doesn't, and maybe it does for some people, but for me, it's never completely gone away, which has been interesting.
So let's shift gears a little bit. You decide to make the leap, and how do you get those first, let's just say 2 or 3 clients? Where do those come from?
It was honestly a bit shocking. I just posted on LinkedIn that I had decided to leave and had sort of opened up and was looking for opportunities. And I had my network reach out to me within an hour saying, let's get together, let's get lunch, let's chat about opportunities. I kind of thought I would have a month or two to kind of get set up and figure out, okay, what is my real strategy here? But it was immediate in the first few opportunities that I had. And, I think that would be the other piece of advice is, I think people intrinsically know what their network looks like and who their contacts are. And I think some of this, yes, I was ready for failure, but also felt like I had enough of a network where I would be okay. And that was, again, very much validated with that initial reaction when I went out on my own. So, my first projects and opportunities were kind of in the door within 2 weeks. And I said to people, I didn't even have a website yet when this thing started. And it was 6 months after I technically launched that I got any sort of a website up and running. So it was just purely referral. And, that was sort of the beginning of the journey right there. And it's never really stopped since, which has been, it's changed, but it hasn't stopped since, that initial posting on social media.
To what extent did you know what your offer was going to be when you ventured into this world right before you found those first few clients? Like, did you know, but if you can put yourself back in 2019, did you know what you were going to be offering?
I did. I had a good sense. What I was doing back when I was at IBM and kind of what I had come in to do was working across different business units to figure out where their stories were and to tell those stories externally. And each day was different. It was different types of business units. It was AI, it was blockchain, it was quantum computing, all very deep tech, but not all that tangentially related other than the technology aspect. And I kind of got the idea and felt as though I could do that for clients and companies elsewhere and build narratives and build communications practices and build really policies and consult for them that then would help them find those stories and then really take those stories to the marketplace and talk to the media connections that I had made over the past decade in this arena and kind of connect those dots in a way that I had been doing previously. And so being able to do that and having that experience, I very much knew kind of how I was going to sell myself once I got into the room with potential prospects. Having that meant I didn't necessarily need all of the websites and everything else, but really knowing what that initial offer was going to be once I got into the room or jumped on Zoom calls made an enormous difference in then kind of converting those conversations into actual business.
How have the projects changed or stayed the same over the years, right? You get those first few projects, you post on LinkedIn, your network reaches out to you and they're like, hey, we could really use your help. It's easy. How have the projects changed?
So it's a great question. And I started pre-COVID and I started in 2019 and it was all in person, right? It was, Zoom calls, hard to believe, but they really were not even a thing. And it's hard to believe now, but that's what the environment was like in 2019. The projects, I think, and that doesn't really answer your question, but I would say the general kind of fundamentals have not shifted in what I've been doing. I think what has happened is the refinement in who I'm doing those projects for has shifted quite a bit. I think one of the things that was really different is at the beginning, I was taking any business that would come in. It was just sort of, okay, I can do this for any industry, any client, anybody who wants to use this expertise, let's do it. And what happened, especially over the pandemic, was I had to pick and choose the industries that I wanted to focus around. Kind of mentioning the IBM inspiration for this, I was doing work with, their health unit. I was also doing work with blockchain, massively different. So when I started this, I was doing work in the health tech arena. I was also doing work in the fintech arena, two really complicated businesses. And eventually you have to choose and you have to say, okay, I can't, again, I'm one person. I can't focus on both of these. They're too complicated. I will not be able to dedicate myself to the clients in a way that they need me to. So it sort of shifted into figuring out the industry that I did want to focus on. And that was really something that occurred, I would say, over the pandemic. I was sort of looking at the different arenas and, again, the different avenues that I had in front of me heading into kind of the end of the year. And over the pandemic, kind of focused less on the health world and much more on the fintech and payments world, which I have a lot of background in as well. And then kind of the AI and the DevOps world. And again, some of this is luck. Some of it happens that that's sort of where things were going. But ultimately the offering has shifted into one that is much more refined into the industries that I am focused on versus it being more generalist. The other thing I would say is one of the things that I do is I do a lot of consulting for agencies as well. And that has shifted a little bit from execution into more real of the consulting world. So it's less execution. I have started to work with other freelancers who help on the execution side, and it's more really working with decision makers on the best ways to go about whether it's bringing in business or, helping to, deliver for business, especially when it comes to the areas of expertise that I have decided to focus on. That's sort of shifted a little bit. And then I think the third thing I would say, and I think this is more of a market shift, is some of the requests I've gotten have been very different. I would say we were in a growth marketplace for a couple years, and that has shifted much more into product market fit. And the communication strategies have shifted along with it as sort of the focus of what some of these startups want to do has changed, just given the general market kind of conditions shifting over the last year.
All right. So we'll talk about the market, and I also want to talk about the agency piece. But before we go there, your first few clients came in from this LinkedIn post, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
When you talk about the fintech, the healthcare, the AI, DevOps, were these just continual inbounds just from your network? Like you weren't doing any business development for the years. It was just like rolling in randomly.
It was all, it was. I don't really know how that's happened. It's all been referral. It's just been consistent referrals. And I have always been a little surprised by that. I'm not sure why that's the case. Sometimes I've thought, I should do more advertising, or I should do more promotion. But at the same time, I don't really need more business, and I kind of like the client base that I have. So I haven't had a whole big need to do it. And it's just been, it's been consistent referrals, honestly. And, I really believe if you are honest and transparent, and look, not every client is going to work out. I think that was something I had to learn about too, was there's going to be things that don't work out. That's just the nature of being a freelancer. But, if overall you are principled and ethical and honest and transparent with the clients, and the work you do is good and what you say it's going to be, then you get more referrals. So it sort of just slowly snowballs. And again, I'm not sure why that's the case, but it's very much been my experience over the last 4 or 5 years.
Did you continue to post on LinkedIn at any kind of regular cadence?
No.
Was it that one post and that was it? You've never posted again?
I've never posted again. I rarely post on LinkedIn. It's a little strange because I tell my clients to post on LinkedIn and do all of the social media stuff, and then I'm behind the scenes not doing any of it. So I don't know what that means. Do as I say, not as I do, I guess. I don't know. But, I think that there is also, and maybe this is it. I've always believed there's some value in staying a little bit, I don't know, secretive is the wrong word, but being behind the scenes, especially in this business. My job at the end of the day is to promote my clients, not myself. And if I can do that, I think that makes me a better communications practitioner at the end of the day. So ultimately, if they are referring me, I think there's a lot more value in that than me going out there and talking about myself, because ultimately my job is to promote my clients, not myself.
So it sounds like you focus on delivering an incredible experience for your clients. And naturally, when they have a really good experience with you, they send you to the people that they know. And then you have a steady stream of clients coming in. Is that fair to say?
That's about what's been going on. Yeah, that's been the last 5 years. And, I think it's not just clients. It's also just general, anyone you work with or encounter. I try to treat everybody the same way, no matter if they're, at a giant company or they're a seed stage CEO. Ultimately, they are looking for a similar experience and they need similar things. And, the media landscape's difficult enough to navigate. And there's a lot of people who think they have a magic bullet for it. And honestly, there isn't one. And if you can be honest and, again, transparent and try things, and not everything's going to work. Not everything, again, it's not always going to work out between you and the client, or it's not always going to work out, whatever your strategy may be. But I think if you can be transparent or honest, it goes a very, very long way in this industry.
And where are you meeting these people? You talked about no matter who you meet, you treat them the same way.
Mm-hmm. Well, again, it's been weird because it's been the COVID era was all referrals and then meeting on Zoom and then having a conversation and moving on. I would say in the last year, it's been, again, I guess the one thing I will say is I will put certain strategic bets down on specific regions based off of where I'm seeing growth. And then I'll have certain people in those regions who may introduce me to new clients or new prospects. And then again, jump on a call or try to meet them in person. And, if there's an overlap, and then you decide if there's some time you want to work together or not based off of how that interaction goes. And again, I try to be as upfront and transparent as possible about what communications is and what I can promise and what I can't promise. Again, I believe that goes a long way, both with founders and with employees at larger companies as well.
But it sounds like you're asking your people for introductions.
I don't know if I wouldn't say that I'm necessarily asking them for introductions. I would say those introductions come through them if somebody asks them for someone they know. So again, it's all referral based at the end of the day. And then I'm happy to talk to whoever, whether it's going to be some new piece of new business or even it's just a consultation if they need somebody like me. That is something I always try to make the time for no matter what. And it doesn't really, and again, not every single thing is going to work out, but just being able to have a conversation with somebody and treating them as though, they're like anybody else, I think is the biggest portion of this, even if it's 30 minutes, and sometimes I have had conversations with people and it's like, look, you don't need a PR person yet. You're not at that stage. And they appreciate that. And then if they do need a PR person, they'll remember you. And so it's sort of, paying it forward a little bit at the end of the day.
If I wanted to build up a $500K a year consulting business myself right now, and I said I wanted a sustainable, repeatable business development system, right? That just delivered clients when I needed it and kept a busy, full pipeline. What would you tell me to do?
Oh man, that is a good question. At this exact moment. Well, I guess like the first thing I would say is figure out what your offering is so that when you are on a phone call with somebody, you very, very quickly can explain to them what you can and can't do. I think overpromising is the biggest way that you can harm your business as a freelancer at the end of the day. And I think that is the number one thing. So just have the offering very much set out before you jump on a call. Second is reach out to your current network. Reach out to them, give them the heads up before you even go out there by yourself that you're thinking about doing this. Get a sense of, is there demand for what you're thinking about before you take that leap? And then third, once you do it, use social for that, and you should know within 1 or 2 weeks what this really looks like. I would say if you're getting inbounds, take every single inbound that you get to start, and then refine from there. And once you take all of them, again, if you're delivering the same product, it won't matter how different those clients are, but then you can start refining it. And as you refine it, you can find efficiencies and then grow into a bigger business. But, you're not going to do it immediately. And it's going to take some time before you really figure out what that offering that drives the efficiencies are going to be. Because you can't have a $500,000 business without finding some efficiencies across industries. But by building the reputation first, finding the efficiencies afterwards, and then getting the referrals from that, eventually I think anyone can get there.
Give us a sense of what we talk about. Mid six figures is where you are now. Yeah. Give us a sense of how many clients at one time. Are they all monthly retainers? Are they projects? Like, what does that look like?
It's a mix, and it's changed. And it started as hourly, honestly. It was just, again, whatever you need, hours is fine, and started there to kind of get my foot in the door and get the referrals going. It then shifted to almost exclusively retainer. And that was just straight retainer. Now where it is it's retainer, but I then bill hourly against that retainer to ensure that people don't so I don't over service. And then the second part is, especially with and then we can get into it, but it was not the easiest year in the world for a lot of VC-backed companies last year. So if I had a strong relationship with certain startups, I would then switch to hourly for them as needed. And that was longer term relationships I had where the relationship was strong enough that maybe they were going through some sort of pivot or shift or needed to change their strategy, and it allowed us to continue the relationship without putting a hold on it. But then as they were going through what they needed to, then shifting back into retainer eventually. So there was sort of this, let's work together. So as I've grown, I've been able to be a little bit more flexible with that model, but it went from hourly to retainer, and now it's sort of a mix, and I can do more things with how this all works together.
And how many clients do you have at any given time?
I would say I try to keep it between 6 to 8. I try not to go over that. Once you hit 8, it starts to get pretty difficult to manage all of them. I think the sweet spot is 6. And once you go below 6, you start to get a little worried. So that's where I try to keep things.
And you get worried because why? Just tell our audience.
I get worried because once you get below that, if one leaves, then you're starting to look at a pretty tough situation. It's nothing other than just percentage for the percentage of revenue per client. It comes down to that. And I also try not to have one client be the majority of my revenue either, because there's too much that's outside of your control. And, I can go into it, but, experienced that a little bit last year with some of the downturn in the VC market. But, I would say last year was the first year I really did experience sort of there are a lot of things that you can't control. That's nothing that you can do, and not even sometimes the founder's fault, but, that leads to a client leaving. And then if you don't have some sort of a backstop, it can be a lot more detrimental at the end of the day.
Let's talk about the market, because it's
Yes.
no secret. We don't need to go over what's happened. We all know what's
Yes.
happened. It's been hard. Companies laid off, and laying off tons of employees, going bankrupt, a lot of mergers.
Yep. Yep. Yes.
It's been right.
All of those have happened. Absolutely.
And it's been a harder, more difficult market for
Yep.
any fractional, right? Anyone out there on their own. So honestly, employees as well. So the question is, what have you changed to navigate the challenging market dynamics last year and then, going into this year?
I think the biggest thing that we already mentioned it, the biggest thing was changing the payment structure at the end of the day. In 2021, towards the end, and even in the first half of 2020, we're in 2024 now, the first half of 2022, it was retainer. And if they weren't willing to pay the retainer, then there was enough other business out there. Shifting to a more flexible payment structure, working directly with them to understand what was going on, I believe has helped tremendously weather that storm. And then the other thing is, sometimes you do have to, especially with startups, particularly, less so the larger clients, but definitely startups, just sometimes say, look, we'll take a break for 3 months and then we'll revisit this, and being prepared for that. So it's not stuff that is all that enjoyable, but again, I think you just can't take it personally. Like, none of this was personal last year, and none of it was anything that really, they didn't want to do it. I didn't want it to happen. And you can almost always figure out a way to make it work if you're willing to be flexible. And that's a very soft answer, but I think that whatever your business is, or whatever your freelance, whatever's happening with your freelance business, if you can be flexible with it, you can weather downturns. And then eventually, I think the other thing is just having patience, because it will turn around eventually. It seems a little bit better this year. We'll see how it goes over the next 6 months, but hopefully no banks are collapsing in March. But the overall marketplace does seem to be turning around, and I think that is a big part of it, is patience. The other thing is, look, my business is communications at the end of the day. And I think I mentioned already that fundamentally, some of it was adjusting, moving from a growth mentality to focusing on product. And product communications and growth communications are really, really different. I mean, they might sound the same, but they are very different. So understanding where your client's business is and what they are trying to focus on, I think also helps immensely. And that comes down to the flexibility aspect too.
I'm seeing this thread throughout how you approach your business, and I want to call it out for you, see what your thoughts are around brutal honesty with honestly anyone you meet, right? Whether if they're just not ready for you as a fractional, you're going to tell them that, and then they respect you. And if a client needs to go down from retainer to hourly, that you can honor that, or they need to take a break, that you're just doing it seems like you keep the client's best interest in mind at all times. And that, even short term, can be turning down a client or saying no, or telling them they're not ready, or cutting your own billings, right? But it serves you in the long run.
Yeah, I think that's true, and it's something I actually I've tried to do since the beginning. Now that you're bringing it up, I mean, one of the things that I did or try to do is basically twice a year, look at all of my clients and sort of say, this one's working, this one's not working, this one's taking up more of the headspace than it needs to be. And sometimes that means letting a client go, even if it's, a hit to the bottom line. But over the long run, I think that, and if I could give any sort of piece of advice, it is sort of trusting your gut. Every time I've trusted my gut, it may be, and again, this is in no way, mathematical advice, or there's no like rhyme or reason to this, but every time I've sort of trusted my gut and had a bad feeling about something, when I've done it, it turns out I should have trusted my gut in the beginning. And then when I've trusted my gut and said, okay, this isn't really working out, maybe it's time to move on and find something new, it's served me well. So even if it's a small hit over the short term, I think, assessing the business at points, and then even if there's a short-term pain, I think it does eventually lead to long-term gain at the end of the day.
I love it.
Yeah.
If I were 1 year into my fractional business and I was where you were, I did maybe 80K in my first year. So I definitely have some clients and some experience, but I'm really looking to take it to that next level. I want to get it to 200, 300, 400, 500K.
Yeah.
What advice would you give me knowing what you know now?
After the first year, if you're at 80K, I think you can start to think about where do you want to focus where is your expertise and how do you focus that? It's refinement at that point. I mean, again, you're not bringing in the six figures at that point, but the only way you're going to get to that 300, 400, 500 type of level is refining the offering to focus on the expertise. Because once you get to that, you can find efficiencies. And once you find efficiencies, you're doing work for clients that, if you have 4 clients in the same industry, you're talking to one person for those 4 clients, let's say. And that is a very different type of business than talking to 4 clients and having to go and find, and again, this is the communications world, but I'm sure it's similar in other ones. And if you can refine that in a way to help build those efficiencies and build those structures that then bring those efficiencies, that is going to be how you kind of get to the next level, whatever that might be, or whatever that might look like. And I don't know what that is for every single freelancer. For me, it was focusing on very specific industries and then knowing what to look for in those industries that would allow me to be successful. I mean, for a long time in 2021 and 2022, that expertise was around funding rounds, right? And there were a ton of funding rounds that were going out there, and you could start to operationalize those funding rounds. You knew that there was a way to make those announcements, and those announcements were very specific. And that became a big portion of the business, particularly in 2021. And, you could do 1 or 2 announcements a week, let's say. And that sort of suddenly figuring out how to almost create a product at that point was a huge kind of boon for that year. That's changed. That has not been happening quite as much after in 2023. But once that started to occur and starting to understand that marketplace, that kind of allowed me to get to the next level. And I think that there's similar types of activities that other freelancers could probably figure out.
Before we drop, I want to dive into real quick. You've been consulting for agencies.
Yes.
How did you get that, and what does that kind of work look like?
So it's a full mix. So my background was in agencies. Before I went in-house to IBM, I worked at a large agency called Ketchum, and I maintained those relationships, and they're great people at all these different agencies. And, I've never really stopped. It's funny because again, mentioning that there's always this pull, sometimes I think about going back to the agency world. It's not something I ever disliked. I always enjoyed it. But once I figured out where my expertise really stood, and some of these businesses and industries are really, really complicated, you can position yourself as a specialist. So it can be anything from new business pitching for the agencies, coming in almost as a consultant to make sure that they're talking about everything the right way, to helping on media relations, to, just ensuring what they're saying is correct in the room. And, being able to maintain those relationships with the agencies has been honestly a business, kind of a work stream that I thought would eventually go away. And it just has continued. And I think it's as long as you're able to offer something that is hard to come by, which eventually comes from just learning an industry inside and out and having that expertise, it can be very valuable and very helpful. And if it allows the agencies to win business, and again, look, I'm a freelancer. I can't take on $500,000 budgets or $1 million budgets, but they can. And I don't have the resources that they do. But if I can help them out, it is a mutually beneficial relationship at the end of the day. There are certain things, obviously, if I have an agency that comes to me for new business help, I can't go and help out another agency with that piece of new business. But there are different structures and ways to go about that. I found it very enjoyable. And also, at the end of the day, I'm an extrovert, and, it can get pretty lonely doing freelancing, just being by yourself, and having the agency portion kind of gives me a little bit of that feeling of being a part of something larger, even if it's still me at the end of the day, which I just enjoy.
Amazing. Anything else you want to leave our audience with before we hop off?
No, I think, again, the only thing that I just want to reiterate is I think the hardest part of this entire process, it's always hard. There's always challenges, and it changes every single year. There's no month that is the same, and there's things that are unexpected that happen constantly. But even so, like, that's at any job, right? And I think, you asked if there's anything. I'm going to actually say two things now, so I'm going to backtrack for a second. But the first is, if you're thinking about trying it out and you don't have anything that's tying you to the job that you're at, then there's no harm in giving it a shot, especially as I think things only become more distributed. If you're talented and good at what you do, people will find you. Don't be anxious about kind of taking that leap. And again, I guess now I remember the second one. The second part is, at the end of the day, it's still a job. And I think the amount of people who kind of, once you have 3 years, 4 years under your belt, say, oh, it must be great to have all that freedom and great to just be your own boss. And I sort of, there are parts that are great about it. Like, you don't have somebody saying you have to stay at the office until 5 o'clock, but you also, I have 8 clients, like, I have 8 bosses, and if they, and they're all over the world. Like, I have some in Europe, I have a bunch in San Francisco. And so it's like, maybe you can be gone from your computer from 3 to 5, but you're waking up and you have emails and you're starting at 6 a.m. So it's like, it all kind of comes out at the end of the day. And anyone who's going out to do this and thinks, oh, I'm going to have so much time and so much freedom and all of that, like, yes, there is days where it's like that, but it's also, to be successful at this, you still have to work at it pretty hard.
Yeah. And I'll just, on this thread for a second, it's partially that way because of how ambitious you are with wanting to grow the business. Is it fair to say, if you kept it in the low 6 figures, that you could have probably 3 or 4 clients at one time, and it would be a lot more freedom?
Totally. Right? And I should, yes, that is a big caveat. I mean, if you wanted to go out with this, and if I wanted to slash my client base in half and, make a bit less money and, have 50% more of my time free, I could do that. But, I don't think I have the personality to actually do that at the end of the day, honestly. So,
but I think I want people to know that you can go out there, make $250K a year, probably work 25 hours a week, and you can absolutely do that, right? Yes. You're choosing not to because of your personality, and you're ambitious, and that's great. And there's no right answer. Right. But it could be, and lots of people do that, right?
Yeah, no, absolutely. And you 100% can, I think. And then maybe that's a good way to end it. I think before even starting this is figure out what you really want it to be. Yeah. And if you want that, then go out and do it. But if you want to, go and take the leap and you want to grow something really big, like, that requires a whole other level of commitment. And that's going to be a different thing than going out and being a freelancer and doing it just because you want more freedom and flexibility. And those are two really, really different goals at the end of the day.
Yeah. Aaron, thank you so much for your time and insights and just sharing everything with our audience. I think people get a huge amount of value from this. So just really appreciate having you on the podcast today.
Great. Thank you very much. Really appreciate being here. And it was great talking to you about all of this.
Awesome. Same.